Madam Secretary, I believe we have everything set and ready to go.
Okay. Then I will let the court reporter know we can go on the record. And we will begin. So good afternoon and welcome. Before we begin, I do want to provide, again, some basic instructions on how to best use Zoom for today's meeting. We have interpreters who will be translating from English to Spanish and Spanish to English. To select your desired language, click on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen and select English or Spanish so that you can hear everything said today with interpretation as needed. I'll give you a moment so you can do that. Please do not check the box that says mute original audio. We recommend this so that you can still hear the voice of the actual speaker faintly in the background, but mostly you will hear the voice of the interpreter when speaking. Dial-in participants on the phone number included in the notice, 646-558-8656, will hear the speaker's voice without interpretation. For dial-in participants who want to listen in Spanish during the meeting, there is an additional phone line for this purpose. Please write this information down. The telephone number for the Spanish interpretation dial-in line is 1-888-585-9008, and the room number is 572-195-548. So to access the Spanish interpretation dial-in line, first dial 1-888-585-9008. Enter room number 572-195-548. Press the pound key 2 times. Record your name. Press the pound key again. I'll pause for those instructions to be interpreted into Spanish, and we'll also put this information up on the screen. I'll wait so callers can now dial into the Spanish interpretation line if they would like to use it. If you're having any technical difficulties, please call or text 857-200-0065 for assistance. This number will be displayed periodically during the meeting. We'll also note that this meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the DPU EFSB YouTube channel, including a version with Spanish audio interpretation.
This does not need to be translated for the interpreter's benefit. Para los participantes que se conectan por teléfono y quieren escuchar en español durante la reunión, por favor, anote esta información. El número de teléfono de la línea de interpretación en español es 1-888-585-9008 y el número de la sala es 572-195-548. Por lo tanto, para acceder a la línea telefónica de interpretación en español, 1. Marque el 888-585-9008. 2. Introduzca el número de la sala 572-195-548. 3. Pulse la tecla de numeral. 4. Grabe su nombre. Y 5. Pulse de nuevo la tecla de numeral. Gracias. Back to you.
All right. Good afternoon again and welcome. This is a remote meeting of the Energy Facilities Siting Board regarding Eversource's proposed project change for the Mystic East Eagle Chelsea Reliability Project, docket number EFSB 14-04A/DPU 14-153A/14-154A. My name is Katie Theoharides, and I'm the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the Chair of the Energy Facilities Siting Board. Joining me today are other members of the Siting Board, whom I'll introduce in a moment. This meeting is a continuation of the prior Siting Board meeting held on December 16th, 2020, and February 8th and 9th, 2020, which completed the public comment portion of the meetings. Today's meeting was announced at the board meeting on February 9th, and a notice was also translated into Spanish and distributed to parties posted on the EFSB project website and emailed to prior meeting commenters and officials. Having completed the public comment portion of the meeting previously, today's meeting will continue with deliberations of the board. The board will deliberate and vote on the tentative decision before the meeting ends, no later than 8 p.m. If necessary, the board may resume the meeting tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. We will have a 1-hour break at 5 p.m. and resume at 6 p.m. We will also have shorter breaks during the meeting at approximately 2:30 p.m. and 3:45 p.m. for about 10 minutes each. In addition, our interpreters will take turns every 30 minutes, and we will pause briefly as needed to let them do so. Now, let me introduce the other members of the Energy Facilities Siting Board participating in the meeting today. Matt Nelson, Chair of the Department of Public Utilities, Cecile Frazier, Commissioner of the Department of Public Utilities, Patrick Woodcock, Commissioner of the Department of Energy Resources, Gary Moran, Deputy Commissioner and Designee for the Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Protection, Jonathan Cosco, General Counsel and Designee for the Secretary of the Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development, Joseph Bonfiglio, Public Member, and Brian Casey, Public Member. Andy Green, Director of the Siting Board, will be serving as the meeting host, along with other staff of the Siting Board. Before we begin, I will provide some additional information about how we will conduct this meeting. Due to the ongoing COVID-19 state of emergency, the Siting Board meeting today will be conducted remotely using Zoom. This meeting is being held pursuant to the Massachusetts Open Meeting Law, the Siting Board's regulations, Governor Baker's March 10th, 2020 Declaration of Emergency, and the related order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law. The board will continue its deliberations on the tentative decision, consider possible amendments to the tentative decision, and finally vote on the tentative decision. All deliberations of the Siting Board are taking place during these public meetings according to the Commonwealth's Open Meeting Law and the Siting Board's longstanding regulations. In conducting the meeting, I want to note some important procedures we will be following. All board members must be audible to each other and the audience. If a board member becomes disconnected at any time, we will note that on the record. If there are significant technical difficulties, I will stop the meeting to allow the problem to be resolved. Before we get to the substance of our meeting, let me mention that a stenographer is participating remotely who will be transcribing everything said to make an official record of the meeting. We may experience some technical difficulties, such as potential background noise, video or audio issues, and other glitches that may prompt the stenographer to request someone repeat themselves. Board members and those on the panel should remember to mute their audio when listening and unmute when speaking. Everyone should speak slowly and clearly. This includes myself, and allow the prior speaker to finish before you begin speaking. The entire proceeding today is being interpreted in Spanish and English in real time. When speaking, each person should remember to help the interpreters by speaking in a loud, clear voice at a moderate pace as best you can. If you are speaking very fast or not loud enough, it can be difficult for the interpreters to do their job and difficult for the stenographer as well, who is here to make sure your words are accurately identified in the record. We are providing English to Spanish and Spanish to English interpretation for today's hearing, consistent with the Commonwealth's language access policy. Everyone on Zoom should make sure to select their desired language, English or Spanish, by pressing the globe icon at the bottom of your screen and then choosing English or Spanish. If you do not select a language, you will hear the current speaker in whatever language is being spoken. Again, for dial-in participants who want to listen in Spanish during the meeting, the telephone number for the Spanish interpretation dial-in line is 1-888-585-9008, and the room number is 572-195-548. So to access the Spanish interpretation dial-in line, dial 1-888-585-9008, enter room number 572-195-548, press the pound key 2 times, record your name, press the pound key again. Andy, do you want to read these again in Spanish?
I think we can move on.
Okay. A video recording of the meeting today in both English and Spanish is being made by the Siting Board and will be posted on the Department of Public Utilities YouTube channel. The YouTube website address is in the meeting notice. In addition, a transcript of this meeting in both English and Spanish will be made available as soon as possible and posted in the Siting Board electronic file room. You can find a link to the transcript on the Siting Board webpage for this meeting. All right, we will now begin the substantive part of the agenda. There's one item on the agenda today, which is consideration of the tentative decision in the matter of NSTAR Electric Company doing business as Eversource Energy, EFSB 14-04A/DPU 14-153A/14-154A, in which Eversource seeks approval from the Siting Board for a proposed change to the Eversource transmission project that the Siting Board approved on December 1st, 2017. The previously approved project included a new substation to be located on a city-owned parcel of land in East Boston. In this proceeding, Eversource seeks approval to move the substation to the west of the originally approved location within the same city-owned parcel of land in the Eagle Hill neighborhood. The board will continue deliberations and finally vote on the tentative decision. The board will now continue its deliberations on the tentative decision. We'll first consider amendments to the tentative decision by staff, and then we will consider any additional amendments for board members. Before we continue deliberations, I'd like to say a few words. As we know and have heard throughout the course of the meetings, the proposed project we are deliberating on today will be located in a heavily industrialized area within an environmental justice community that has historically suffered disproportionate environmental harms and a heavy burden of infrastructure. This context has weighed heavily on my mind as I've spent the last 2 weeks thinking about this decision since our last meeting. There's no question that now is a time for policymakers to seriously consider the prior injustices of how and where our infrastructure has been sited. Some communities, like East Boston, have traditionally borne more of a burden of negative environmental impacts of major infrastructure projects or proximity to places with heavy polluting loads like the airport. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we know that these communities are environmental justice communities throughout the state that are also home to many of our first responders and essential workers have been hit especially hard by this virus and the resulting economic slowdown. The Energy Facilities Siting Board asks for members to balance providing reliable energy with cost and environmental impact. Ensuring a reliable energy supply and access to electricity and other services requires infrastructure to be sited throughout the state. The rolling blackouts across Texas have demonstrated that infrastructure, particularly energy infrastructure, is crucial to ensuring essential services, public safety, and meeting basic human needs. We've seen how disruptions in essential resources, such as electricity and natural gas, can quickly and directly impact public health and safety, and even become life-threatening. As we continue to rely on electricity for basic functions and to transition to a clean energy future, including electrification of home heating and transportation sectors, both substations and transmission lines are essential pieces of infrastructure to maintain reliability and build the electrical grid of the future. The notion that a substation is part of a fossil fuel past is a false, politically motivated narrative. Substations are a piece of infrastructure that will be critical in our ever-growing electrification of the building and transportation sectors and will deliver ever-increasing amounts of clean and renewable energy produced by wind and solar. The communities of East Boston and Chelsea have a right to reliable electricity as we make the transition to a more electrified net zero carbon emissions footprint in 2050. And that is a consideration we have to balance here against the impacts of siting this facility. Throughout the entire process and during the past 2 weeks since our last meeting, I have reviewed this case again, the staff's tentative decision, the comments submitted by every stakeholder, and the questions and answers discussed by my colleagues on this board. Based on the facts of the case and the presentation of data by interveners, I have concluded that there is not sufficient evidence to reopen the needs assessment that has been evaluated and ruled on in 2017. In 2017, the EFSB evaluated the need for Eversource's transmission project, including this substation, as well as non-wires alternatives and various alternative combinations of transmission routes. That case concluded that the project, as proposed, is the best way to meet the need for reliable electricity service for the Chelsea, East Boston, and Lynn load area. The underlying approval also stipulated that construction on the project start within 3 years, and that the company should work with the City of Boston to relocate the substation to the very location that is the subject of this project change proceeding. Both of those conditions were met by the utility. Today, the board's sole decision is whether to approve the project change, which would move the substation several hundred feet west from the original site. This project change raises issues of cost and environmental impact, but does not require reevaluation of project need, alternative approaches, or site selection. Based on the discussion with the board at our previous meeting, as well as revisiting the extensive testimony in this case, I sense there is agreement around this point, but we will open this up to further discussion as needed. While it appears that the utility's forecast data underscoring the need for the project might not have been provided by Eversource to some in this current case, those forecasts were made publicly available online and were used by the siting board to substantiate the need for the transmission project as part of the approval process in 2017. When the EFSB approved the project in 2017, no parties appealed that decision. While time has passed and one can argue that the load forecast that Eversource provided previously might have become outdated, there is not sufficient evidence in this case to show that it is likely the need for the transmission project has been reduced substantially, such that the East Eagle substation would no longer be needed. New capacity, energy, loads, and transmission data comes out every year, and if any changes in that data were sufficient to reopen the board's decisions, few, if any, board decisions would ever be truly final. Although the assessment of need is not directly in the scope of this proceeding, I have heard the significant concern about this project and its location in East Boston that has been expressed by members of the community, as well as by many residents outside of East Boston. I very much appreciate the participation of the community members and others and recognize the historical environmental injustices that this community has endured. While this project does not have some of the typical impacts associated with other energy infrastructure projects, it does add to the cumulative amount of industrial infrastructure sited in a community that already feels overburdened. There have also been concerns expressed related to other potential impacts, including the location of the facility as sea level rises. In recognition of these factors, I have prepared amendments for this board's consideration that I would like to discuss as we go through amendments. At this point, I would ask to begin deliberations that we need a main motion before us. Do I have a motion to adopt the tentative decision?
No motion.
Second?
Second.
So now that the motion has been seconded, we will leave the main motion on the floor for further discussion.
Excuse me. I have to interrupt at this point, and this will be true for every motion and seconding. You can't go so fast that I can't see who's making the motions and who's seconding.
Oh, sorry about that.
So-
Yes.
So I did hear Mr. Nelson make the motion, and I did hear a second, but it went too fast for me to catch who seconded it. So Mr. Bonfiglio seconded it. Thank you.
And I will try to repeat people's names when motions are made and seconded.
Thank you. That's what I was.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, so at this point, I would like to hear from other members of the board. Are there other members who would like to provide commentary, ask questions, or we can get directly into the amendments portion of the discussions?
Brian Casey, I would propose we move forward into the amendment section.
Okay, Brian, you're very quiet.
That's a first. I suggested that we move right into the amendment section.
And sorry, I'm supposed to be using last names, Mr. Casey.
That's fine. Thank you, please.
So I will ask then Presiding Officer Evans, are there any updates to the staff amendment sheet?
Yes, thank you, Chair Theohardis. The staff sent out an amendment sheet for this proceeding back in March when we were going to have the March board meeting. Staff sent a revised amendment sheet on December 15th, 2020 that updated the various parts of the orders between March and December. And since then, we've had a couple of additional procedural steps here because we've had more meetings than we had anticipated. So I would like to further amend the December 15th, 2020 amendment sheet with the following language to update the procedural section of the TD. And I think the best way to do is I'm just going to note where I'm going to amend the amendment sheet so that that language ends up in the correct place in the decision. So I indicate on the second page of the amendment sheet, the second paragraph, we listed the various comments we had received in response to the request for written comments. I would end that paragraph, add a sentence to say that the Citing Board received additional public comments in January and February 2021. Okay. I would indicate toward the bottom of that same page of the amendment sheet that the Citing Board postponed the December 17th, 2020 board meeting due to severe weather. I would further add that the Citing Board scheduled the continuation of the board meeting for February 1 and February 2, 2021. The board provided the same notice as for the December board meeting. We required the company to translate the notice into Spanish, Portuguese, and Arabic, publish the notice in local English and Spanish language newspapers, provide a copy of the notice in all 4 languages to all persons on the service list, provide a copy of the notice in all 4 languages to all owners of property and renters within 1/4 mile of the new site, and post a copy of the notice on the company's website. The notice included snow dates of February 8th and 9th, 2021, in case of severe weather. The Citing Board meeting for February 1, 2021 was postponed due to severe weather. The Citing Board conducted a remote board meeting on February 8th and February 9th, 2021, at which parties, limited participants, and others provided oral comment. The Citing Board conducted a continuation of the remote board meeting on February 22nd, 2021. Spanish language interpreters were available at the public board meetings to provide real-time interpretation. So that is the update for that portion. The one other update to the revised amendment sheet, is on the last page of the amendment sheet, the first paragraph, and I would have that first sentence read, after for use with contracted interpreters, I insert, in addition, in preparation for the December 2020 and February 2021 board meetings, recognizing that we had meetings in both months. And that concludes my updates to the revised staff amendment sheet of December 15th, 2020.
Okay. I would like to ask if there is a motion to amend the tentative decision to include the proposed amendments included on the staff's revised proposed amendment sheet.
So motioned.
Motion from Chair Nelson,
Second.
second from Mr. Casey. Is there any discussion on the proposed staff amendments? Okay,
They seem to be in order for me, so.
likewise.
Just one question. If we have any other update amendments, should I make that separate from the staff amendments to the, okay, great.
Yes, yeah, we will move to that next. So if there's no further discussion on the staff amendments, I will now ask for a roll call vote by the board in favor or opposed to the amendments on the staff revised amendment sheet as updated by the presiding officer today. Mr. Nelson,
Affirmative, I vote affirmative.
Mr. Woodcock,
Yes.
Ms. Frazier,
Yes.
Mr. Costco,
Yes.
Mr. Moran,
Yes.
Mr. Bonfiglio,
Yes.
and Mr. Casey.
Yes.
And I will vote yes as well. The motion to include the revised amendments with a tentative decision is approved. Now, to continue with our deliberations, I suggest that we consider additional amendments to the tentative decision individually and vote on whether to include each amendment in the tentative decision as we go along, just so we can keep track of all of them. Following the discussion of all proposed board amendments, we will vote on the entire tentative decision, inclusive of all of the amendments that the board has voted to include, both the staff's amendments and any additional board amendments. So let's move on to discuss any additional amendments that board members would like to consider. And Mr. Moran, I believe you have something to suggest here.
Yes, I did. The amendments were just two updates to reflect the updated status of the wetlands filings. And I have the location of the citation in the staff amendment document. So if I could just cite that, page 4 of the staff amendments. It's the.
Oh, sorry, I might have misunderstood you, Mr. Moran.
Yes,
I'm sorry.
So it would have to find it in the document, which I don't have, in the decision itself, which I don't have offhand.
Okay, but these are, your amendments are changes to the staff amendments themselves.
Yes,
Okay,
which were amending the document.
okay. Miss Evans, can you help with that?
Sure. If someone could make a motion and second it for Mr. Moran to give us those amendments, I can, if he indicates where they are on the amendment sheet, I can indicate where they are in the TD, and we could go through it that way.
I would like to put a motion on the floor for Mr. Moran to indicate what additional amendments he has to the tentative decision with regards to the wetland permit.
Seconded. So we have a motion from Chair Nelson and a second from myself. Do we need a roll call on that?
We
I think
we need a motion at this point. So if Mr. Moran can sketch out what it is that he would like the board to consider, that would be the next step.
You need the roll call just for the vote, not the
Okay.
motion.
Okay.
Okay. On page 4 of the staff amendments, the amendment to page 52, line 22, add at the end of that amendment the following. The order of conditions was appealed to the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection on December 4th, 2020. And on page 5, the
So
amendment,
if I could just say that first one would actually be, yes, on page 52 of the TD, after the amendments that we included starting on line 22.
thank you. And on page 5 of the staff amendments, amending page 62, lines 23 to 25. Delete the final sentence of the amendment and replace with the order of conditions was appealed to the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection on December 4th, 2020. Eversource will construct the project in accordance with the requirements of the department's final order.
And that on the TD would be on page 62 after the amendment to lines 23 to 25. Thank you.
So we need a second then to that motion.
I'll second the motion.
All right, seconded by Mr. Nelson. Before we have a roll call vote, is there any discussion of these amendments from Mr. Moran? Okay. Mr. Nelson,
So I am, yes.
Mr. Woodcock,
Yes.
Mr. Costco,
Yes.
Mr. Bonfiglio,
Yes.
Ms. Frazier,
Yes.
Mr. Casey.
Yes.
I am also a yes. All right, do any others, before we move on to additional amendments, do any others have any changes to the staff amendments they would like to propose? Okay. So let's move on to any additional amendments for board members. Who would like to begin?
I have one for emergency response planning.
Okay, Mr. Nelson, go ahead.
So I was hoping staff could bring that amendment up on screen for us. I'm going to bring it up here on my screen as well. So I think over the course of the proceeding, we heard fairly compelling questioning and concerns from both the interveners and the public commenters around what the company's emergency response plan was, along with what their plans are in the event of flooding and fires. And so this amendment is meant to have the company develop emergency response plan and to allow that to be submitted to the siting board, as you can see here, in an effort to improve public safety I think that there is a concern too that we wanted to note, given the substation's location related to the jet fuel tanks, also for review to make sure that all their fire apparatus are in complete working order, in line with the code, but also that they can review any sort of fire suppression technology that they would deploy in other facilities they use, and whether or not that was going to be appropriate here. Provide that information back so that we can continue to have that kind of reporting into the siting board to allow for us to review or for us to get the information related to their emergency response plan. Give everyone a moment to read this through. Andy, should I read this in to the record, or is it?
I don't know if we have to read the exact text into the record. Joan, do you have a legal opinion on that?
I do. I think we should read it into the record.
I can barely read it on my screen, so that
Okay.
would be helpful.
I will read it into the record. Just tell me if I'm going too fast. So the siting board directs the company to prepare a comprehensive emergency response plan for the substation, hereby known as the substation ERP, that describes the specific steps to be taken in response to emergency situations, including but not limited to flooding and fires. With respect to flooding, the substation ERP shall detail the plan of action, including equipment requirements, and deploy temporary barriers and pumps to keep the water away from sensitive equipment. The substation ERP shall also specify thresholds and criteria for shutting down portions of the entire substation in the event of flooding. The substation ERP shall also describe the structure of communication and authority that would follow in the event of an emergency at the substation, specifically identifying the public safety and emergency management officials by whom Eversource would coordinate. In developing the substation ERP, the company shall contact the appropriate municipal and or state public and emergency management officials and inquire as to whether any information regarding the substation is necessary to supplement existing emergency evacuation procedures. 2, provide timely information about the substation in order to support evacuation planning, and if so requested by other officials. 3, participate in and support relevant evacuation planning. The company shall submit to the siting board the substation ERP at least 30 days prior to the start of operations of the substation and indicate any evacuation-related provisions of the substation ERP that are still in development with the appropriate public safety and emergency management officials. That is the end of the amendment.
Before we discuss it further, do I have a formal motion and a second to adopt?
So moved.
Second.
Sorry, I didn't see either of those in this case. Let me move my screen up.
It was
Who-
Gary Moran who moved.
Joe
Okay.
Bonfiglio, who seconded.
Thank you. All right. Are there discussions or questions on this amendment or any proposed changes?
Just
Mr.
to be
Woodcock?
clear, this would add additional detail. There was in the draft tentative decision an ERP required, and this provides specificity of what's included within it. That's right.
That is correct. We wanted to be specific, especially with relation to the unique nature of the location of the substation in its proximity to some of the industrial equipment nearby.
Okay, thank you.
Are there questions from, well, I'll stop a minute if I'm missing board members. Are there questions for Mr. Rosenberg or Mr. Daniels? I'm not seeing any. I just want to make sure. I don't see everyone's screen.
Yeah. I think you could maybe bring it down for the moment, Andy or Dean. Yeah, so we can see if everyone's on screen.
Mr. Nelson, how would this, so it looks like this would require coordination with first responders in East Boston. That's articulated in the third piece?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and it will, they have to comply with all municipal and state codes related to this, but I think given the knowledge of the local emergency responders in the area, and ones we may not even be thinking of right now, we wanted to make sure that the company was able to document that they've done that and include it in the as part of the record here as well.
Okay. I am not seeing further questions or discussion from members. So having a motion and a second, we can move to a roll call to adopt the amendment.
I think Mr. Daniels is raising his hand.
Sorry, thank you.
I just have one question. I'd like to confirm whether the proposed ERP will at some point before operation begins be accessible to the public for their review and comment.
I believe as part of the motion on the floor, the amendment on the floor, it will be provided prior to the facility going into operations, but it does not, as currently written, have any comment period.
If I can just add, this would be treated as a compliance condition with the board's decision. And when it's filed, it would be posted for review by the public in our electronic file room, which automatically makes it available for both review and comment. So that's implicit, I think, by the description of what it is.
Thank you.
I would also say that that any compliance filing for this project, that the company would be required to file all the compliance filings with all the parties to the proceeding. So they would get direct notification of those compliance filings.
Thank you.
And Joan, I imagine, or Ms. Evans, I imagine translation of all the filings will be as it has been for the rest of the process.
We can do.
What?
Por supuesto, of course.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other questions or discussion? Okay. We will then move to a roll call vote to adopt this amendment as written. Mr. Nelson, you have proposed the amendment. So Mr. Woodcock?
Yes.
Mr. Costco?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Mr. Bonfiglio?
Yes.
Mr. Moran?
Yes.
Ms. Frazier?
Yes.
Mr. Casey?
Yes.
I will vote in favor as well.
I believe we also need to hear from Chair Nelson.
Oh, sorry.
I vote
Nelson.
yes as well.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Chair Nelson, for that amendment. Turning to other areas of project change, based on the information we have reviewed in the record and many comments about future sea level rise, severe storm events, and flooding risk, I would like to add an additional condition on the topic. Mr. Green, can staff put up the text on screen, please?
Yep, just give us a moment.
Yep. So recognizing the impact of climate change, both in the city of Boston and across the Commonwealth, I offer an amendment for the board's consideration relative to sea level rise and flood mitigation measures. And this would replace what we began to discuss at the last meeting. Under this proposed amendment, the company will be required every 5 years to review any city and state projections for sea level rise, as these projections tend to be regularly updated, and submit a report to the siting board that analyzes the necessity, appropriateness, and cost of implementing additional flood mitigation measures at the substation to ensure the safety of the surrounding residents and infrastructure. The siting board would then review each report and determine whether any additional flood mitigations are necessary, appropriate, and if determined so, implemented. Importantly, consideration would be given under this amendment to ensure that any mitigation measures will not have detrimental effects on neighboring parcels. I was concerned about the idea of just determining what a flood mitigation structure might be today in our proposal, rather than having the company consulting with the city, the Office of Coastal Zone Management, and the Department of Environmental Protection about any flood mitigation strategies not affecting parcels that are adjacent to or near to the station. So I would make a motion to adopt this sea level rise condition, including any modifications that we want to make from the discussion. But we can discuss now, or we can second it and then move to discussion.
If we could just begin by reading the text as.
Oh, right, I forgot that. Yep. So the exact text is the following: the condition shall every 5 years, or sorry, the company shall every 5 years review the city's and the state's projections as applicable of sea level rise and submit a report to the siting board analyzing the necessity, appropriateness, and cost of implementing additional flood mitigation measures at the substation to protect the substation from inundation. In preparing each report, the company shall consult with the City of Boston, Office of Coastal Zone Management, and the Department of Environmental Protection. The siting board will review each report and determine whether any of the additional flood mitigation measures are necessary and appropriate and shall be implemented, provided that any mitigation measures shall not have any detrimental effects on neighboring parcels at the substation. Mr. Green, just trying to get this procedure down. Should the discussion happen before the second or before the motion? What's your preference here?
Now is a perfectly good time.
So I will open it then to any discussion or questions from Mr. Daniels or Mr. Rosenweig. Mr. Woodcock.
So I appreciate the amendment. Just to clarify, is this every 5 years from the date of operation?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I think it could work either way. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to do it from the date of operation when it goes into effect.
Other thoughts on that point, Mr. Moran?
Not necessarily on the
That's okay.
start date, but as far as a procedural item, how would this be dealt with? And I guess this is a question for the board staff. When this comes back every 5 years, is this something that appears before the full board for a determination, or is it dealt with some other way?
My understanding was this would be delegated to board staff, but I am not certain of that, Mr. Green.
So this report, when it comes in, again, would be publicly available and distributed to parties in the proceeding in perpetuity. And if there are proposed modifications of the facility to address the risk of flooding, and the company wishes to actually redesign, re-engineer the facility to address those risks, it would result in a project change of the approved substation, which, if it's of a significant nature, would come back before the board, just as this project change is now before the board for its review and determination.
Great. Thank you.
Mr. Green, would that automatically be triggered, or would it follow a standard proceeding where parties would have to make the case on both sides? Who makes the determination about the scope?
There's an initial determination by staff as to sort of the level of significance of the proposed change.
Yep.
And if we're talking about adding 3 extra bolts to a footing in a concrete pad, it's probably not worthy of the board's further review. If we're talking about adding a seawall or major structures that have impacts to the community, that would most likely need to go before the board for its formal review and determination.
Yeah, that seems to be an appropriate way, so that if it will affect the community or the people in the community, they would have a chance to voice their concerns. But again, if it is just small to address a minor problem, then it could be scoped less. But I think that seems appropriate, given the attention that the community has had on this site.
And I should point out that in either case, whether it's before the board for a decision or dealt with informally at the staff level, the documentation is still publicly available and visible and can be commented on.
And again, if the company files for some kind of change pursuant to this section, that not only goes onto our website, but it goes directly to the party. So the parties are notified of those changes by the company.
And back to Mr. Moran's sort of procedural question, in terms of signing off on the 5-year report, would that be done in consultation, but would that be done by the siting board in consultation with CZM and DEP and the city in their roles? Or would the siting board be signing off on it independently?
Well, I think the condition itself by its own terms requires Eversource to conduct outreach to CZM, DEP, and the city of Boston. So I would anticipate that their filing to the board every 5 years will include a description of what the dialogue has been and the nature of the engagement with those agencies, who, again, will have visibility into the filing made. So if there's any inconsistency or disagreement, I think they can certainly express that to the board when it reviews the filing.
Okay, I think my goal is to make sure that, you know, agencies with additional oversight of sea level rise and flooding have a role in ensuring, you know, the information that is needed is in the report. And I don't know if we need to be more formal about it in the language I wrote.
Your language does say shall consult. So
Okay.
I view that as mandatory.
Okay. Mr.
Ms.
Nelson?
Evans, I have just a legal question that you may be able to answer. Obviously, 5 years is a long time, and I imagine there's going to be a lot done on flooding and flooding mitigation. If there's an additional agency that's created or formed, is this something that could be incorporated posthumous into this, or just wondering how that generally works?
Yes, we could include another company, another agency, excuse me. I don't think this limits the company
Okay.
to consulting with just these agencies that we've identified here. If there's an additional agency created or that now becomes involved in sea level rise, I think the expectation would be to include that agency also.
Okay.
But we could add including but not limited to, if that is more explicit for you.
That would be a proposal I would make.
I support that change.
Okay.
Secretary, the big one that comes to mind for me is MEMA, just
Yep.
as since FEMA has so many roles with flood maps and everything like that, I imagine they will have a expanded role.
Mr. Nelson, I think that is a very well taken point. I think we should add MEMA
Okay.
proactively.
Could I have the acronym clearly, please?
Sorry, the
Yeah.
Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency.
So it's M.
They have been our partner on all things climate resiliency. So that was a mistake not to include them on my part. Other discussion here? Okay. Then I will make a motion to adopt the amendment with the changes proposed by Mr. Nelson
And myself.
and Ms. Evans.
I will second that.
All in favor? Any further discussion? All right. I can't do an all in favor. I will do a roll call. And I'm going to do it with who I see first. Mr. Costco,
Yes.
Mr. Bonfiglio,
Yes.
Mr. Woodcock,
Yes.
Mr. Nelson,
Yes.
Ms. Frazier,
Yes.
Mr. Casey,
Yes.
Mr. Moran,
Yes.
and I will vote yes as well.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Motion carries.
We
So,
have Spanish on the English channel, just for the interpreter's benefit.
sorry, Mr. Green, what do you mean by that?
Secretary, can you?
Are we having a technical discussion? Off the record?
I don't know.
I
I just
can't hear, so I think we need to be because I can't hear.
Mr. Green, did we need to pause? I missed your comment.
We had a technical problem, that's all.
Okay.
There was Spanish being interpreted on the English channel, so we
Okay.
want to make sure we have the interpretation properly set up.
Okay.
Mr. Arsenault, are you ready to
I'll-
transcribe?
I am?
Okay. All right, so we're back, I guess.
Okay. So one other area where I would like to see an amendment to the tentative decision is regarding the inclusion of a process to reach a community benefits agreement or a CBA with the East Boston community, Eversource, and other officials. I have specific language in mind here for an amendment that we can discuss that I'd like to offer. If staff could please pull that text up on screen. I will talk through it and then read it into the record. So a community benefits agreement, which is something new to this board, would require the company to enter into good faith negotiations with the Eagle Hill Civic Association or other community representatives of the neighborhood prior to the construction of the East Eagle substation. The idea would be to ensure the neighborhood will see additional benefits from the project and the community will be compensated for any associated negative impacts. Importantly, any agreement here must directly benefit the community of East Boston. So I'll read the specific text. I'm just try to put a picture on my screen. In recognition of the environmental justice populations residing in the East Boston community and the unique legacy of significant environmental impacts associated with existing major infrastructure in this community, the Siting Board directs the company to enter into good faith negotiations for a community benefits agreement prior to construction of the East Eagle substation. The agreement shall aim to include measures to further mitigate impacts and further increase environmental and energy benefits as defined in the Commonwealth's energy justice policy, environmental justice policy. As part of the agreement, the company shall ameliorate negative impacts that are reasonably likely to occur as a result of the construction of the substation. Any expenditures or actions taken under an agreement negotiated pursuant to this condition must directly benefit the community of East Boston. The chair may establish procedures to guide the negotiation of the agreement, which may include, but are not limited to, designating a counterparty or counterparties, provided, however, that preference shall be given to the Eagle Hill Civic Association, appointing a mediator or other facilitator, receiving regular reports on the progress of the negotiations, and establishing spending limits. If the chair determines that the company has negotiated in good faith and no agreement has been reached by August 1st, 2021, construction may proceed notwithstanding this condition. So knowing that's a lot to take in and process, we can pause for a minute and then discuss before we do the motion. And I will also open it to Mr. Rosenweg and Mr. Daniels if you have questions or comments.
I do, but it can follow your discussion, or I can put out some thoughts at this point, whatever you prefer.
Well, I'll see if any board members have comments first. Mr. Casey?
I would like to hear from the petitioner first, just to, my concern would be around budget and what has past practice been around neighborhood mitigation or linkage payments to that, the older term that was used.
Okay. Are there other comments from the board before we hear from Mr. Rosenweg and Mr. Daniels? Okay, why don't we start there and then we can circle back to discussion. Oh, sorry, Mr. Nelson.
Nope, why don't we start there?
Okay.
So I'll touch upon a few concerns for the board to weigh as they're evaluating this condition. I think as an initial matter, I think the company would support a discussion process with members of the community, their representatives, to address direct impacts that are associated with the facility. It has always been our intent to minimize impacts to the extent possible and to address as many concerns as are feasible with regard to the facility, to those that are in the proximate area of the project, and to minimize those impacts if at all possible. Two areas are matters of concern. It's my experience, and I think it's a general point that I ask the board to consider, is that when settlement negotiations like these occur, that they occur with duly authorized representatives, and they are conducted in a confidential manner, so that there can be a free exchange of ideas and sharing of pros and cons and a give and take and compromises that may be struck. That type of procedure tends to produce the most effective type of results for settlement discussions. And we wouldn't want, and I don't think any party to that process should want there to be a risk of publication or exposure on issues that are under consideration through the settlement process, because that can tend to thwart the free exchange of ideas, the compromises that may need to be struck, the balancing of interests. So we would want that settlement process to be conducted as a confidential process, where the information contained would be just shared with those that are part of the negotiation group. So that's one issue for you to consider. The second is the August 1st date. Less would be better for Eversource. It is our belief that the need for this facility is acute, and we certainly don't want a Texas type episode to occur in the local community because of aberrant conditions on weather, extreme conditions. We've been delaying the construction of this facility for years, and it is very much needed at the present time. The construction process for the project is going to be about a 2.5 year process, and every month counts at this point. And so to the extent we could shorten that window of time within which there would be settlement discussions and before which construction could commence, that would certainly be to the advantage of the company completing this project in a timely manner and having it in place to serve customers' needs, to ensure a reliable supply in the East Boston area. And if you quickly do the math, if we were not to commence construction until August 1st or thereafter, and we're talking about 2.5 years, this facility would not be available to serve customers until 2024 at the earliest. And it would be our hope to shorten that period of exposure to the reliability of the system serving East Boston as much as possible. So that is a second issue that comes to mind. Every month counts, and we'd like to get to the point of not only achieving a balanced and reasonable settlement discussion with the community members, but being able to commence construction as quickly as possible at this stage.
Mr. Casey?
Mr. Rosenzweig, isn't it safe to say that we could accomplish both goals, meaning that the majority of the construction is going to be infrastructure related underground and probably wouldn't play into mitigation or settlement discussions? So if you looked at the proposed construction schedule, I would imagine the issues that would be in discussion with the neighborhood community would really be around probably the latter stages of construction. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that does sound accurate. And I'm just thinking of construction windows where once you get to the winter period, sometimes that can stall construction because of weather conditions, frost, and we don't have any street crossings here per se, but if we start to approach a period of time where construction is not able to begin before the winter period, November, December, where construction can be more difficult, we start to run into the risk of missing a construction season and thereby extending construction by 3 or 4 months if we're not able to begin construction as timely as we would otherwise want.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is isn't there a way to keep the date that's been proposed, right, as far as concluding settlement discussions, but allowing some level of construction that we all know wouldn't impact those discussions anyways, i.e. borings, some footings, cabling, you got a lot of transmission work. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that has to happen between now and August that really wouldn't, you could begin and it wouldn't compromise those discussions. That's what I'm trying to get at.
That's a fair point. And I'm also thinking broadly, because this has come up in prior siting board cases. The statutory term of construction and commencing construction can actually mean engaging in financial commitments and doing preliminary site work. And I would like this condition to be interpreted interpreted in terms of construction as being physical in the ground construction, and to exclude other elements of commencing construction which have come up in other cases, so that the company can enter into commitments to engage its contractor to purchase materials and supplies to do borings and such in advance of the August 1st date, which would be, in my mind, if it has to go out that far, would be a physical construction window that wouldn't be triggered until the settlement discussions have been completed or that date has been achieved.
So one of the questions I had, Mr. Rosenweg, and one of the things I was trying to balance while putting this together was the need to get a reliability project online as quickly as possible for the peak period, which is sort of August, September. So we definitely missed that period this year, no matter what we do. If, you know, this is you're saying this is a 2.5 year build. I was thinking it was more on the realm of 6 months to a year. I am not sure that delaying till August, I'm just trying to play the months out, does much to the key reliability period we're trying to hit here. And I'm also less comfortable starting any physical construction before the agreement has been agreed upon, just in case there are any changes to, the design or layout or construction in the agreement itself. So that is something I'd rather avoid. I'd rather truncate the period to negotiate the agreement than split up. I'm okay, I think I'm okay with the preliminary construction things rather than physical construction being broken up into 2 blocks. But Mr. Nelson, I see you have a question as well.
Yeah, I think one of the concerns that I would have is the tenor of this provision is to try to negotiate in good faith with the community. So as soon as they start seeing the site being constructed, I think that there would be concern on the community's behalf that it's a foregone conclusion. I do think I completely agree with your position that we have to differentiate the term construction to give meaning to what we mean by that, so that it is not interpreted or it's not ambiguous to all parties involved. One of the things I think maybe the board could discuss in more details, again, with the perception issue being there, is, I would maybe consider something happening. I don't know the exact, I'm not a construction guy. I do not know what we're talking about, laying foundation or putting up a chain link fence. I don't know what you're constituted here in terms of specificity, but there is a certain risk that anything that happens before a certain date would be on the company's ledger, right? That if work was done. So there we could have a discussion around what that term is, because I think that's going to be very important to understand what exactly they are able to do and not able to do. But I do think the community will have concerns around the aesthetic and also the impact and location of certain on how this will appear in their community is my guess. So it would be hard to cut that off right at the beginning without at least having some discussions around that. And I also think if I read, and Secretary, you can comment on this, your decision, that's the end date, but a decision could be reached prior to that date as well. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
So a couple of just further comments. I understand your point, and it certainly would be our intent to approach these types of settlement discussions in good faith with the community. We do believe that there can't be an unbounded amount of money that would be contemplated to be within the scope of the settlement discussion. It has to be reasonable in light of the impacts of the facility and reasonably related to that. And that would be very important to Eversource. I would urge the board in adopting this condition to differentiate the term construction so that some of the interpretations that have come up in cases in the past about physical construction versus preliminary steps that are binding commitments in furtherance of construction are differentiated. I'd also just emphasize to the board and to the secretary that the peak period is really the beginning of June through September. It's not just the latter months that you mentioned, so that every month does matter. And, June is a period in time where there can be historic peaks because of schools still being in session. And at times we do see heat waves in June that lead to very high peak loads. So those are all factors. Not having an unbounded concept of what might be appropriate for mitigation, given what we think are manageable impacts, that it's reasonably related to the impacts from the facility. The timing of August 1st, the confidentiality of the settlement discussions, and the differentiating of the term construction, so that is clear, and physical construction is really what is contemplated here by the board. Those are the key factors on quick review that I would ask you to consider.
Okay. Mr. Daniels, I open it up to you at this point so we hear from both.
Sure, thank you. So to begin, I suppose I'm a little confused about sort of the goal of this proposed amendment. Reading it, it seemed as though the goal would be to provide some sort of benefits in kind in recompense for what the community perceives it is lost by the construction of the substation where it's proposed to be sited. And I'd emphasize that from the community's perspective, or at least my client's perspective, representing the community, that loss is pretty substantial to them. We're talking about a space that for going on 20 years was promised to be another green space for East Boston, which already sorely lacks them. And now they're not going to have that green space, and people's enjoyment of the adjacent green spaces is diminished by having this thing next door. Bracketing, so at the outset, I'm a little confused as to what that kind of benefit in recompense would actually look like. Are we just talking about planting some more trees around East Boston on the streets, or what that would look like? But I'm also somewhat confused by the characterization of these discussions as being settlement discussions, particularly given the express preference for Eagle Hill Civic Association as the counterparty, given that Eagle Hill Civic Association isn't a party and they don't have appeal rights in this proceeding. It's a little weird to me to characterize this as any sort of settlement discussion when one side of the table is a non-party. And I think there is also going to be concern in the community about making sure that the counterparty is actually in touch with their concerns and actually a good representative. And I would suggest that Eagle Hill Civic Association has not really been as involved in the issues concerning this project. And so there may be doubts about their suitability in that role.
So to the second point, I think we have been looking for a group who is in the direct neighborhood and represents the community most directly impacted by the substation and represents that broad range of community members directly in the neighborhood. I would say there is discretion left open to who should be party or counterparties to this agreement. And we can take information on that to make a final determination of who the party or appropriate parties would be, but looking for direct involvement in the neighborhood of East Boston. And the first question, I think there is a broad range of outcomes that could result from this. I don't think there is any predetermined outcome of what an agreement would look like in this case.
To the secretary's point there, I think we don't want to dictate what the community wants, right? But I think we want to give them the opportunity to dictate that on their own terms as well. So, we don't, to your point, Mr. Daniels, I think that we're trying to suss that out here as well.
I don't know that the board could have dictated the terms or the scope of what that agreement should look like or what would be considered through that agreement, but I don't think the board feels that we know what the community would want to make this agreement about.
I mean, I guess, not to put too fine a point on it, but I think what the board has heard over many, many hours is that they don't want this facility in their neighborhood, and recognizing that that is not likely how things are likely to go. I'm not sure what space there is for meeting in the middle there, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I don't know that this is that I would characterize this as a settlement discussion so much as a community benefits agreement to address some of the potential impacts from the project and to add benefits directly to the community that is impacted.
I believe the word settlement is actually not
Included.
Right. It's called a CBA.
Mr. Woodcock?
Clarify. I wanted to assess if there is not an agreement reached, if the petitioner is able to submit their, I guess, last and final offer to staff, and staff would be able to accept it. I'm wondering what occurs if I'm trying to recollect the exact language at the end, so I don't have that in front of me, but if there isn't an agreement, my understanding was that as written, the company could proceed, but whether there could be an ability to accept an offer, just a question of that unfortunate outcome.
And Commissioner Woodcock, my interpretation of the language was that the company had to proceed in good faith, and that would be demonstrated by what it was willing to put on the table and what proposals it made and how it handled counter proposals. There will be someone in the position of being either a mediator or facilitator, I took from the language. And so if there was some element, I believe, at the end of this all, that there wasn't an agreement, and it was because the company had not acted as it should have acted, I think that'll become self-evident. I really don't want to introduce another step where the company has to go into sort of a defense of whatever it did or didn't do and await the outcome of that disposition before it could commence construction. There will already be parties in place that will be able to confirm or deny that the company has acted in a reasonable manner during the process.
Just be interested on maybe EFSB staff if comfortable with the approach, or if there is a way, if there are reasonable steps taken, or if the mediator believes that there's something that was established that is reasonable, whether that could be accepted as a step without the counterparty agreeing to it.
So perhaps we should look at the last sentence of the proposed amendment, because I think it addresses this. Dean, maybe you could bring that back up again. The very last sentence, I believe, gives the chair the discretion to determine whether or not the company has negotiated in good faith. and it would be the chair that would have that ability to make that determination and say whether or not the company can go forward.
And that's based on receiving the reports from the process during that 5-month period to ensure that both parties are coming to the table to negotiate in a meaningful way, and A, not waiting till the last minute, or B, not showing up to the table at all.
So I would just offer the observation that, again, as a compliance condition with interim updates to the board, there is always the opportunity for staff to either informally or formally conduct some oversight or investigation of compliance with the condition. So if there seems to be an impasse or bad faith occurring by month 3, let's say, of this time period, staff could again inquire or investigate and apprise the board on its own of what's happening and propose any interventions that might be necessary to try and achieve a successful outcome of this process.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that the EFSB staff is comfortable with this approach and that the chair has visibility in the negotiations to make that determination.
I can express my own opinion, others may differ, but I think that Commissioner Woodcock, we certainly endorse the intent of the amendment and would like to see some mutually agreeable improvement in terms of ameliorating impacts in the community and improving the benefits to the community. So that's very positive. We do have concerns that if an agreement is mandatory before construction can proceed, that in effect grants an unchecked veto power to any party that chooses not to sign on with the ultimate agreement, which would frustrate the board's intent in having this facility built, or could frustrate it. So we support the use of the facilitator to try and achieve a successful agreed upon outcome. Again, with the opportunity to conduct oversight along the way and try to nudge that towards success.
Thank you.
I'm wondering whether we would like to add any language to this amendment to reflect the physical construction concern that we were discussing earlier.
Yeah, I have kind of 3 outstanding issues from the discussion, and that's one of them. So I think,
Why don't we start with that?
yeah, why don't we start with that one? So I guess I'm going to ask David Rosenzweig, just to be clear, kind of when I look at the stages of construction, and this is my layman understanding, there's the initial stage that could be considered, which is planning, financing, and kind of permitting period. And then there's kind of the engineering or layout portion. We are beyond both of those steps in this current proceeding, so that would not be the definitional starting point. So the next 2 pieces are excavation and footings, and then foundation, drainage, and backfill. Kind of what I see as kind of the 2 next delineated stages. Mr. Casey or any members of the board, do you agree? Kind of that's where we're at. I feel like we're more at the.
You've captured it. I think you've captured it well.
Okay. I think we're more at the foundation, drainage, and backfill piece of construction. I don't know if Mr. Rosenzweig, you have any comment on that.
And that's what I had in mind, Mr. Chairman. I think the other elements that are somewhere in between what you described and physical construction are the company would be allowed to order equipment, transformers, breakers, GIS breakers, and other equipment which has lead time associated with it. The company would also be allowed to engage a third-party contractor who would be in place to do the physical construction once a settlement is achieved or the end date occurs. Those types of measures had, in some of the case law, have been interpreted as being prohibited in the sense that they represent construction. The definition under Section 69G that applies to the siting board would include those types of measures, and maybe General Counsel Foster Evans would confirm that. And I just want to make sure that those aren't contemplated to be within the don't start construction element before the completion of settlement or compromise discussions, community discussions in August 1st, that we can go forward and so that when that date does arrive, we have a contractor in place. We have, equipment ready to be placed on site. We have the cables that can be pulled across the creek to be brought into the station, that the timing of those elements not be suspended during this period of time.
And I agree that our interpretations of commencing construction have included a broader range of activities than just a backhoe in the ground.
Yeah, and so I would say that given this, I think we should be very specific with our language. I would say the intention, and please correct me if I'm wrong, so far has been not any of the preliminary work, ordering or setting up phase that could be accomplished. I do not believe that was the intention of the restriction. I think it was intended more of the, so once you get to the, setting of a foundation, digging for drainage or doing any sort of backfilling, that would be the prohibitive step based on my interpretation of the amendment. So things before that, such as preliminary finding, moving things on site or pre-staging events would be appropriate. But let me open that up to other members of the board and see if they think that is the right delineation or if that's too far.
Can I just suggest wording to consider for the discussion, which I think to distinguish what we're talking about permitting versus what 69G might prohibit within the definition of construction. I think we're contemplating allowing site preparation and preliminary civil engineering of the site in general, and allowing the company to enter into contracts for material and services. And that's sort of, as far, I think, is what we're talking about.
That goes along with what I was thinking.
May I offer some language here to reflect that? And I may not have caught everything everyone has said.
Yeah, 1 minute, Mr. Evans. I just want to take Mr. Casey's comment.
Sorry.
Oh, and I think I had just added major equipment too.
Major equipment.
Long lead items that need to be purchased.
Okay. All right, go ahead, Ms. Evans.
Sorry about that.
No.
Where the amendment currently states that the company must enter good faith negotiations for a community benefits agreement prior to construction of the East Eagle substation. Perhaps we can say prior to the physical construction at the site of the East Eagle substation. Would that encompass what we're talking about?
I think we would need the clarifying statement after that, Ms. Foster Evans, not including site preparation, civil engineering, and execution of contracts for material and construction services.
Okay, I think I was considering that physical construction would not include executing contracts, but if we wanted to go further and allow site prep and maybe equipment deliveries on site, then we would need to specify that.
Would ask either of the parties whether that language delineates more clearly the intentions of the amendment.
I do support the collective additional language from Mr. Green and Ms. Evans. I would just also put the word equipment in there into the list of measures or steps the company can take without triggering the definition of construction for this purpose.
Mr. Daniels.
I don't think my client has a position on, takes a position either way.
So could I give a shot at it with where I think we are here? So that same sentence that we were talking about that currently says prior to construction of the East Eagle substation, that part of the sentence would read, prior to the physical construction at the site of the East Eagle substation, not including site preparation and equipment and material deliveries. Does that cover everything?
I would just add and engaging in contract with third-party suppliers or vendors.
I mean, that last part seems obvious to me as a non-construction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's
It's not physical construction is how I would.
It doesn't seem like that's needed.
Right.
Can I ask whether the term civil engineering needs to be added to site preparation for clarity, or whether it's redundant?
I would say it's redundant. If it's not, I mean, council captured it by saying physical activity, so civil engineering and site prep would be in there.
I'm comfortable with the language Ms. Evans read. I think it adds clarification to the language, but I don't think we need to get it perfect. I think it just needs to clearly state what phase of the delineation of construction we're in. And I think that the language does that. Maybe I should make a motion to adopt the language Ms. Evans stated, or is that out of order, Ms. Evans?
Well, I think we can make an overall motion, including the amendment from Ms. Evans and any other amendments to the amendment.
The next item I had that was brought up was around confidentiality. And I don't know if any of the board members feel that a requirement of having the parties enter into a confidentiality agreement would have a benefit or would detract, or whether we have no opinion whatsoever. My initial blush is that it would certainly, I don't know if I would not preclude it. I would not preclude it. I just don't know whether we should require it.
Well, the thought in drafting this the way it is drafted is to leave some discretion to work on this in a best practices manner going forward. We have not done one of these before, and I think there is more work we should do to understand the best practices from the environmental justice literature on how these are best executed. So at this point, I had left that deliberately open to determining moving forward. I don't know that I have a learned opinion on the matter of confidentiality at this point in time, where I could judge that today, but I'm open to others' perspectives here. Mr. Casey.
I would just echo your point. I think, it's better to leave it open and flexible so that we can address, the concerns of the neighborhood. But I would add that I think the important piece is to whatever those parties are, how they're constituted, that they have some kind of binding authority, so that there's no one really playing Monday morning quarterback after the hard work's been done.
Ms. Evans and Mr. Green, from the language that we've written here, there is finality to whatever is agreed to in this process? Or is there more clarity needed?
I'm not sure we have a definitive endpoint in the discussions in terms of whether we will achieve a mutual agreement or not. It certainly seems to contemplate the possibility that it does not come about, which would not preclude the company from building the substation if it was determined to have negotiated in good faith. But I think the option is available to the board to still adopt the community benefits that at least have progressed during the negotiations that may not have been agreed upon, but still are on the table, that may be available to the board to adopt or impose on the company going forward.
It seems as if while we've identified one possible item on the list of how the negotiations would occur are regular reports on the progress of the negotiations, it seems as if either you have on August 1st an agreement filed, or you want some kind of final report from the mediator / facilitator at that point in time of kind of where the parties are or what happened during the process, so that if that report contains certain items, perhaps the chair would want to would consider opposing some of those items.
Oh, I'm sorry, proposing, opposing, I didn't hear.
Proposing the P.
So, Ms. Evans, if I understand, you're saying that the last sentence that reads in that the chair determines that the company has negotiated in good faith and no agreement has been reached by August 1st, construction may proceed notwithstanding this condition. We would add another sentence afterwards that said, if that trigger is met or if that provision is met, the facilitator or mediator shall submit a report to an entity. Let me just use it that way because I think we'll discuss it. Is that what I'm hearing is being proposed? So that we get a narrative about what happened during that process?
I would suggest you would get one of two things by August 1st. You'd either have the parties file an agreement, a CBA, or if there is no CBA, I think your third-party mediator would be the best one to report kind of a final report of where the parties are and how and what transpired during negotiations. It would not affect the confidentiality at that point would not affect anything because there's no actual agreement at that point. I think it would not affect the negotiations. So you would get one of the two things by August 1st, 2021.
Seems reasonable to me.
And then do we want to include something explicitly stating that the board may impose findings from the report?
I would think that they would not impose findings. They would the board could have the option of imposing
Mitigation measures.
mitigation measures. Yes, Thank you.
That
I'm
was
not
the
sure
point.
what that process would look like at that point in time. There would need to be
Not either.
additional process.
Right.
That was what I was trying to get at.
Yeah.
I think just to sequence this, the chair should receive a report from the mediator prior to August 1st to allow the chair to make a determination if, in fact, it has been done in good faith negotiation. Right? And I don't know what the specific date is, but
Well, right now, the way it's written is the chair is supposed to receive multiple reports before August 1st. I guess one of them we might want to say is a final report before August 1st.
Yeah, I agree. I think you should set the final date so that you know when you have to make the determination and have that date set prior to whatever the end date is set to be.
So if the end date is August 1st, do we want it to be a full month in advance? Several weeks? I mean, I know that sometimes these negotiations take right till the end or as much time as there is. But some sort of interim report at least 2 or 3 weeks out seems reasonable.
I would say minimum of 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Yeah, I would too.
All right, let's go with 2 weeks. I mean, there may also be limited value to imposing any of the mitigation conditions if they are not things that the community has expressed a desire for. So I think that is something that needs to be balanced as well in those decisions at the end. I think one of the things the board has recognized is we don't have those answers.
I think it might be helpful in the requirement that the mediator submit a report towards the arrival of the August 1st date, that they outline areas of agreement between the parties, areas of disagreement, and perhaps a recommendation for the board as to what they think is an appropriate mitigation package as part of the CBA.
I like that approach because then if we hear things the community has wanted that the company is not agree, we can look at both sides and provide a recommendation of what we think is a fair agreement.
Mhm.
If I could make a recommendation of 14 days prior to the 31st, just so we don't get into the business days or what does 2 weeks mean in holiday situations. So say 14 days.
Or snow days.
Any of them, hopefully not in August, Andy. But
What about just saying a day?
yeah,
I mean, a
we
date.
could do it. It's August. I counted backwards to August 17th, which is a Tuesday of 2021.
July
July.
17th.
Oh yeah. Well, and that's why we check the math.
So here's a suggestion. We had intended to take a break for everyone's benefit a few minutes ago. And maybe with the discussion, staff could try and modify this condition to reflect the ideas that have been accepted, it seems, and then we can reconvene and look at the condition again. I just want to mention that I'm aware that board member Costco has a time constraint. So we may lose him in the next half hour or so.
Yeah, I apologize, but I will be unavailable from 3:15 to about 3:45.
Okay. Well, then let's take a very quick 10-minute break now and reconvene so we can go off the record. Thank you. waiting for a few more members of the board to join, and then we can go back on the record.
Andy, I think you might have to start my video. It's Gary.
Okay. Sorry there. I'm also having a little bit of a snafu myself.
Awesome, thanks.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
All
Are
right.
we all
We're
back?
not, we are not all back, no. We're waiting on Mr. Bonfiglio. Perhaps in the interest of time, we can start back on the record. Okay.
Okay, while we were on break, Chair Theoharides, we have reworded the community benefits condition, and I think we can present that for review.
Okay. Andy, do you want to read it just because of its small text?
Sure. Or Joan, if you'd like to.
I can do that. I'm wondering if we wanted to wait for Mr. Bonfiglio.
Oh, he's back. He's back.
Oh, he's back. I can't see him. I'm sorry.
No
Okay.
worries.
So we responded to some of the discussion we just had on the record and proposed the following revisions to the proposed amendment. And the first is to deal with the question regarding what can be done prior to entering into the CBA. And what we recommend is at the top part of the screen, where we state that the board directs the company to enter into good faith negotiations for a community benefits agreement prior to the physical construction at the site of the East Eagle substation, not including site preparation, contracting, and delivery of equipment and materials to the site. Does that satisfy the concerns on that portion of the amendment?
If your question was to me, I believe it does. Thank you.
And I just want to make sure we've caught the discussions that were had by board members.
I have no problem with this language. I think it adds.
Yeah, I think you captured it well.
I concur.
So that I'll move down, and in the discussions that we had regarding the counterparty or counterparties of any such community benefits agreement, we indicated that preference shall be given. However, that preference shall be given to, but not limited to, the Eagle Hills Civic Association, to give more latitude on that particular part of the provision.
I think that's helpful, and I would clarify that I do have discretion to take input on this from parties and any others who would care to submit additional information on community groups.
Okay, thank you. Staff had a quick discussion, obviously, on the break, and wanted to indicate or make it clear that we expected that any agreement that if an agreement is reached between the parties, any such agreement is filed with the citing board by August 1st, 2021. And make that explicit.
Yep.
Then the final sentence goes to the question about what happens if no agreement is reached. And I'll read that additional sentence. Excuse me. If no agreement is reached, the facilitator or mediator shall submit a final report by July 16th, 2021 to the citing board outlining areas of agreement and disagreement and recommending to the board mitigation measures that could be implemented in lieu of an executed CBA.
So I don't understand how a facilitator or mediator would know that no agreement is reached prior to the final agreement date of August 1st.
And my point of order on this one is, this would be submitted to the chair, right? Because the chair is the one that does the determination in the prior sentence.
That's a good catch.
Well, in theory, we're saying that an agreement could happen in those 2 weeks.
Yeah,
But the chair,
I mean, most
chair would
agreements
know.
happen in the final week, I would think.
Right, but the chair would know that, I guess, is the point.
Yeah, I think, yeah, so let's do point of order here. So I think the purpose of this is the final report will go to the chair on July 16th, right? At that time, I would say because this is the way the sentence is constructed. Just follow my logic here. We've established that the final report goes to the chair on July 16th. There could be in the last 2 weeks something that happens that results in a final negotiated amount. The chair at that point makes the determination. As part of that determination, I think she can send the final report to the citing board. That would be at her discretion to send the final report to the citing board outlining areas of agreement and disagreement, right? So that would be in the event that isn't reached. Does that make sense?
Mr. Hazel, can you edit this while we're talking to indicate that the final report goes to the chair?
It shouldn't be called the final report if it's coming to me on July 16th. It should be called the interim final report because there are things that can change.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then I think the chair has the discretion to submit the interim final report to the citing board.
So why don't we
That's
just
correct.
take out to the citing board and
I
that's just
would.
part.
Yeah.
Okay, July 16, outlining areas of agreement and disagreement and recommendations for mitigation measures that could be implemented in lieu of an executed CBA. Do we want a final sentence about the chair's discretion for submitting this to the citing board?
You just need to add the word of before mitigation or for FOR.
So I think my other issue is that I think we want this interim final report, even if they're steering towards an agreement, because we want to know where that's headed. So I think something is submitted by July, an interim final report is submitted by July 16th, regardless
So I think
of the outcome.
Delete the first clause, and just leave capital T.
I've also been advised by counsel at EEA that the first use of "but are not limited to" above where we're looking right now is needed, and we should not delete that.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm not clear if there's a final sentence needed about the chair's discretion to require these mitigation measures to be implemented.
The chair has discretion to submit the mitigation measures, and let's categorize them as non-agreed to mitigation measures. To the siting board.
Mitigation measures not otherwise agreed to. How about that?
Yeah, that's good. To the siting board for consideration.
I would almost move the second half of the prior sentence and end it with outlining areas of agreement and disagreement.
Okay.
Period. And then move the end to after consideration.
Okay. Like that?
I need to read it a minute. Agreement and disagreement. And I think I would say, and any, I mean, because what I'm trying to be clear here is that the interim final report may actually spell out the direction for an agreement, not just measures that we would seek to impose because there was an agreement. So I just want to be clear that it's not only, I guess it is clear. So it's clear that that could be agreement or disagreement. Chair has the discretion to submit the mitigation measures not otherwise agreed to.
Careful. I realize you're reading to yourself. I'm still trying to take it.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll read it quietly.
Can I just suggest after the phrase outlining areas of agreement and disagreement and his or her recommendations to the board? Because I think
To the
it's not
chair.
advantageous to get
The
recommendations.
chair, because this is not, if there's an agreement, this doesn't need to go
Correct.
to the board. But is it really recommendations to the chair or is it?
I think it's just recommendations, right?
I think it's, well, I mean, it's not really recommendations, it's direction of the conversations. It's outcomes of the discussion. We're not the ones supposed to be litigating this.
Right.
So I don't know that we need recommendations so much as we need a report out of what's been decided and what hasn't been.
So if I'm reading this clearly, I think you're right. I think the facilitator or mediator submits the interim final report to the chair, highlighting what happened. There's 2 more weeks. At that time, if no determination is reached, the chair has the discretion to submit the mitigation measures not otherwise agreed to the siting board for consideration. Recommendations for the mitigation measures that could be implemented in lieu of an executed CBA. Do we need to
That's
fix
not
that
a
front?
sentence.
Yeah, we got to fix the front end of that sentence. Recommendations from
the interim final report?
Yeah. And then delete 4 mitigation measures. Could be implemented in lieu of the CBA. And what was submitted to the board is at the discretion of the chair. Just like an amendment would be, right?
Mhm.
We do need a final phrase at the end of this with the citing board's approval.
Okay.
I'm a little confused of the purpose of the second to last sentence.
I mean, it says, yeah, it says the same thing as the second to last sentence.
I think you could combine the last two sentences.
Yeah,
to
they
one
say the same thing.
sentence.
Maybe with a semicolon? Or just, are we?
I don't think you need
removing
both
one
of them. I don't think you need both of them.
Okay,
Well, the difference is the first one is referring to the chair and the chair receiving the report, and the second one is referring to what the chair submits to the citing board, right?
Well,
That's the only,
I guess I don't know if we need to have the chair submit something to the citing board.
right.
That, just a question. I don't know that we need to have that step.
Well, how would they get there?
Well, I think the way it's currently drafted, it considers the chair having discretion to review the report. And if there's no agreement reached, make a recommendation of what types of mitigation measures that weren't agreed to that could be implemented. I believe that's the intent here of the way it's drafted. The other thing is that the way before this, before the interim report and these language we've added, the way it was drafted really gave the chair lots of discretion to figure out the logistics of this process. And perhaps it's better to just let the chair figure it out when it's actually happening here instead of being quite so prescriptive. I don't know if that's would be a better solution.
I think the language actually works here, but on that second to last line where it says could be implemented, I think may be implemented is a better word choice.
I think, Joan, the point is well taken that if the chair has discretion to submit the mitigation measures, why do we need to say that?
I think we're trying to be clear, but I'm not sure
No.
we're achieving that result.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree too. I think I like having the interim final report by a date certain in here. I think that's helpful to establish that up front.
And then you'd have discretion to figure out what to do with it from there. If it resulted in some kind of major change to the project, it would end up having to come in eventually as a project change. So it'd be really the nature of whatever mitigation was agreed to or recommended.
I think you can just change the chair has the discretion to submit the mitigation measures not otherwise agreed to the citing board, which may be implemented, just remove everything else and say, which may be implemented in lieu of an executed CBA. Then you've consolidated both sentences and
I think deleting made it more clear rather than adding more language.
that's what I meant, delete the last part and add that, right?
Yeah, I was just holding it in case somebody changed their mind.
I don't know if you have the board's approval or not. That's, I don't know if that's required.
I don't have strong opinions on this additional language.
I think maybe just a little bit to the siting board. The chair has the discretion to submit the mitigation measures not otherwise agreed to the siting board, which may require them to be implemented in lieu of an executed. The siting board would require that those measures be implemented. So I think you would say siting board, which may require these mitigation measures be implemented. Yeah.
If I could suggest, maybe imposed by the siting board instead of the required implies something else.
Impose without the D.
Okay.
Impose.
Impose mitigation measures in lieu of.
Or yes.
Okay.
Let me, because we've changed it quite a bit, just so that it's clear on the transcript. Let me read these couple sentences again, please. So after the sentence that ends, construction may proceed notwithstanding this condition, we would add the following two sentences. The facilitator or mediator shall submit an interim final report to the chair by July 16th, 2021, outlining areas of agreement and disagreement. The chair has discretion to submit the mitigation measures not otherwise agreed to the siting board, which may impose these mitigation measures in lieu of an executed agreement.
Secretary, I think you're muted.
Sorry, not trying to add more language, but I think in the facilitator or mediator shall submit an interim final report to the chair outlining areas of agreement and disagreement and a progress report. I mean, it seems like a status update is an important part of that report, and maybe that's clear from the final report.
Providing a status report and outlining areas of agreement and disagreement.
Yep. Okay. There's also a note that we are unspecific. The chair has discretion to appoint a mediator or other facilitator. We then require the report to come from a mediator or facilitator. So we're sort of, I think a mediator or facilitator is a necessity here. So we just may want to be definitive about that rather than leaving it to my discretion, since we've said the report must come from one in the bottom clause. I think this was a case of, leaving it more open. But if we're binding who the report comes from, we may as well say that that there needs to be a facilitator.
So perhaps
There's a way to do that.
the sentence that begins with the chair may establish procedures to guide the negotiation of the agreement, which will include appointing a mediator or other facilitator, and which may include.
Yep.
And the rest of it would be fine, except we would delete that part. Yes. Does that get at what you're looking for?
Yes, exactly.
For clarity on the last sentence, I think there may be a whole range of mitigation measures that have been discussed. And it may be important to note that the siting board may impose some or all of these mitigation measures. It's not necessarily a take it or leave it of the entire list.
That's true.
Secretary, I had one small suggestion.
Sure.
Just so we're on the same page with the calendar. By my calendar, August 1 is a Sunday.
That's a good reality check.
And I don't like that we have the determination of the chair and proceeding on the same, filing the agreement and starting construction if the chair determines on the same day. I'd be interested on staff's suggestion, but maybe having a July 30th, a filing on July 30th and start construction on August 2, which is a Monday. Open to, just, it didn't quite look right to me.
I think that's materially no different, but would probably save us some headaches in terms of sequencing.
Yes, thank you.
Other comments or questions? Mr. Nelson?
I think that we have improved the amendment's clarity without changing its underlying intent, which I think will be welcome when we read this later on.
Okay. I'm not seeing other questions or comments. Okay. So I will make a motion to adopt the amendment as amended by the siting board staff and shown here on the screen in red line.
I think we may need to read this
Read
into
it
the
in.
record.
I can do that.
It's gotten quite long.
It has. All right. In recognition, so a motion to include the amendment as follows.
And you need a second.
Second.
For Mr. Moran. So I'll read it. In recognition of the environmental justice populations residing in the East Boston community and the unique legacy of significant environmental impacts associated with existing major infrastructure in this community, the siting board directs the company to enter into good faith negotiations for a community benefits agreement, hereafter agreement, prior to the physical construction at the site of the East Eagle substation, not including site preparation, contracting, and delivery of equipment and materials to the site. The agreement shall aim to include measures to further mitigate impacts and further increase environmental and energy benefits as defined in the Commonwealth's environmental justice policy. As part of the agreement, the company shall ameliorate negative impacts that are reasonably likely to occur as a result of the construction of the substation. Any expenditures or actions taken under an agreement negotiated pursuant to this condition must directly benefit the community of East Boston. The chair may establish procedures to guide the negotiation of the agreement, which will include appointing a mediator or facilitator, and which may include, but are not limited to, designating a counterparty or counterparties, provided, however, that preference shall be given to, but not limited to, can you scroll down, the Eagle Hill Civic Association, receiving regular reports on the progress of the negotiations and establishing spending limits. Any agreement reached shall be filed with the siting board no later than July 30th, 2021. If the chair determines that the company has negotiated in good faith and no agreement has been reached by August 2nd, 2021, construction may proceed notwithstanding this condition. The facilitator or mediator shall submit an interim final report to the chair by July 16th, 2021, providing a status report and outlining areas of agreement and disagreement. The chair has discretion to submit the mitigation measures not otherwise agreed to the siting board, which may impose some or all of these mitigation measures in lieu of an executed agreement. You know, reading it back, I would move the facilitator sentence above the final report. Does that make sense?
Is that the correct location?
Yes.
Yes.
Do I need to read it again? Okay.
A point of
Um,
clarification, if I may.
Yep.
Do we want to specify that the facilitator is a company-funded facilitator? It is selected by the chair or approved by the chair, but should this be a company financial obligation to provide the mediator funding source?
I think probably.
I think that the other option of putting it on community members would probably be overly burdensome. So I don't know what other entity would be appropriate. I think that's a good suggestion, Mr. Green.
I mean, I guess the only thing is that something we could leave to discretion? Because again,
Sure.
Oh.
I guess the only question is if the company pays for it, is there an appearance of it being non-neutral? And do we want, I don't know if the DPU has funding to pay for something like this, but I guess not having the answer to that today, I'm wondering if we need to make the decision.
Well,
If
you get
you're
to
looking-
establish the procedures to guide the negotiation of the agreement. So I think that the independence of the facilitator would be achieved,
Okay.
even with the company providing the financial resources to retain a facilitator.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a company selected facilitator. They would just get the bill. They would not necessarily be the one choosing choosing it.
I think also if you're expecting the company to fund the facilitator, I think it's better to make it explicit.
Okay.
Ms. Evans, is this a good location to specify who pays for the facilitator?
Yes.
Okay. Other changes? Okay. Should I remake my motion, Mr. Green?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I will make a motion to adopt the amendment with the changes incorporated by the EFSB siting board staff and shown currently on the screen.
Second?
Mr. Moran seconded.
Yes.
Okay, I will do a roll call.
Any further discussion?
Oh, sorry, thank you. Further discussion? Okay. Mr. Casey? Sorry.
Oh, yes.
Yes, okay. Ms. Frazier?
Yes.
Mr. Costco?
Yes.
Mr. Nelson?
Yes.
Mr. Moran?
Yes.
Mr. Woodcock?
Yes.
Mr. Bonfiglio?
Yes.
I will vote yes. Okay. Are there other amendments that we should discuss from other members? Sorry, I'm negotiating between screens, so I'm trying to see all of you at once here.
I had one small one that regarding the community outreach process for aesthetic design. Ms. Evans Foster, we discussed this a little bit of ensuring that the community engagement be done with translation and with accommodation for non-daytime periods. I think that's a minor change, but that's on page 40 of the draft tentative decision. Draft page 39, rather.
Would you like me to propose some language?
Yeah.
Please.
Ms. Evans, staff have prepared this in advance, and if you have it available, you can read it. Otherwise, I can either explain it to Mr. Woodcock or share the screen and show it, read it directly.
Go ahead, Mr. Hazel.
Okay. Mr. Woodcock, after you expressed the desire to have some additional public engagement around the condition on page 39, the siting board staff worked on the language that's included in red here. The language that's in black text is currently in the tentative decision, and the red text is new. So what we would add would say, the company shall make available Spanish language interpretation and document translation services for the focus groups and open house. Eversource shall consult with Green Roots in regard to identifying a time and place for the focus group and open house in an effort to maximize public participation. For example, meeting venues in close proximity to the new site, scheduling focus group and open house during evening hours. Scheduling the focus group and open house during evening hours.
Is that what you had in mind, Mr. Woodcock?
Yes, thank you. I was also wondering if there's a way to engage, as we don't know how we'll have open houses, whether there's a way to engage through non-in-person. Open house has a kind of an open meeting, but and engage the public through online mediums.
That's right. The tentative decision was written pre-COVID, so I can definitely add a virtual in here in appropriate places.
Yeah.
Or should that be a more global change at the beginning of the document to address that? Because that's probably throughout the document.
I think in this particular instance, there's two events. There's a focus group and an open house.
Okay.
So I think we can address them individually here. Do I need to say anything about, in accordance with COVID protocols or anything like that?
I think that accomplishes it. I guess, whether we could at least have a public comment process that is that is available. I think this, again, to your point, was devised in a completely different environment.
I don't think you need to add in alignment with COVID protocols. I think it's
I think this accomplishes it, Dean.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Thank you.
So just so it's clear on the transcript, so Mr. Hazel added in this paragraph that we are editing that appears on which page of the TD?
Page 39 and
Page
also on page 91.
The item includes a list of steps for the company to follow, and added to the first step of the focus group meeting and the fourth step, the open house, we're adding the words either virtually or in person to those events.
Okay, is there any discussion before we ask for a motion?
So on behalf of Green Roots, I would just like to ask that you take out the requirement of consultation with Green Roots. And the reason why is simply that, building off of my earlier comments, we don't see much, if any, value in either this or in the previous condition that was discussed and adopted, in that you all sat here and listened to hours upon hours of community members saying exactly what they wanted, which was not to cite the substation where it's been proposed, and rather, either convince us that it's needed at all or explain why it's not cited in a more suitable location such as the airport. And we have now spent much more time tinkering with the language of these conditions than discussing, for example, why an airport site has not been seriously considered in either this proceeding or the underlying proceeding. And frankly, if you think that the community's opposition is going to be mollified by, for example, getting us in a room together and talking about what the thing is going to look like, or a process involving, going into a room with some community groups, perhaps EHCA, and them getting some money to plant some trees. That doesn't correlate with either reality or with our vision of environmental justice. The other thing I would say is that in our Title VI related filings and in other contexts as well, I think we've been more than clear in terms of pointing to best practices and guidance from the federal government, among other groups. And quite frankly, you all should know, and Eversource should know, the best practices by now if you really want to follow them. So we really don't have any interest in going along with this.
We can make that removal.
Eversource shall consult with, we could just say that, a representative community organization generally, or Mr. Green, would it be appropriate if Eversource, sought approval of the siting board staff or anything like that in lieu of consulting with Green Roots?
Interested stakeholders, perhaps?
So the sentence has been revised and now reads, Eversource shall consult with interested stakeholders in regard to identifying a time and place for the focus group and open house in an effort to maximize public participation. If this looks acceptable to the board, I can take us back to I'll stop sharing my screen.
Mr. Woodcock, since it's your motion.
Yeah, thank you, Dean. And Mr. Daniels, you've been clear about, when this was raised earlier of your clients' no interest in participation in this. I did note in the record that it identified that this process was lacking engagement and tried to address those concerns. But I understand the point that this does not address your client's position with this project.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, I think I need a motion.
I move to adopt the modifications for community engagement for design of aesthetics related to the proposed project.
Seconded.
Seconded by Mr. Nelson. So Mr. Casey, any further discussion?
No further discussion. Nothing from me.
All right, then I will call you for a vote.
I vote in the affirmative, yes.
Okay. Ms. Frazier?
Yes.
Mr. Costco?
Yes.
Mr. Nelson?
Yes.
Mr. Moran?
Yes.
Mr. Woodcock?
Yes.
Mr. Bonfiglio?
Yes.
And I will vote yes. All right. So I think we are up to 4 amendments. Are there other amendments today?
I'm sorry, it's 4 amendments plus the staff amendments. I just want to
Oh,
make sure
sorry.
we
Yes, I'm sorry.
have everything.
Yes. Okay. Hearing none, we will return to the main motion, which is to approve the tentative decision proposed by staff with all of the amendments we have just approved, both those on the staff's revised amendment sheet and those proposed and accepted by the board. As just described, that is the main motion now before us to approve the tentative decision as amended through these discussions. Is there any further discussion before I call for a vote? Okay, hearing none, we will now vote on the main motion as amended, and I will call a roll call vote on the motion to approve the tentative decision as amended. So, Mr. Casey,
Yes.
Ms. Frazier,
Yes.
Mr. Costco,
Yes.
Mr. Nelson,
Yes.
Mr. Moran,
Yes.
Mr. Woodcock,
Yes.
Mr. Bonfiglio.
Yes.
I will vote yes as well. The motion as amended is approved unanimously. With that vote, the citing board will now proceed to issue a final decision inclusive of the approved amendments. Staff is hereby directed to prepare a final decision as amended for the chair's signature. Before we adjourn, are there any other matters that need discussion?
Just a question on when we can expect the final decision to issue.
Mr. Green, do you know the answer to that?
Yes, because of the need for translation of the document when issued, we will need some additional time beyond our usual time frame to provide that translation of the final decision. So I would hope that in the next few days we can complete that and both documents can be issued simultaneously.
All right, and my understanding of the statutory scheme is that the appeal period would then start from the issuance of the final decision rather than today's vote. Is that correct? Is that also the staff's understanding?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other matters to discuss? All right. Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
So
No
moved.
motion?
I'll say motion by Mr. Nelson. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Bonfiglio. All those in, do I need to do
Roll call time.
Sorry?
Roll call.
Okay, Mr. Casey,
Oh, yes.
Ms. Frazier,
Yes.
Mr. Costco,
Yes.
Mr. Nelson,
Yes.
Mr. Moran,
Yes.
Mr. Woodcock,
Yes.
Mr. Bonfiglio.
Yes.
And yes, the motion carries and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you everyone for attending today's siting board hearing. We are off the record.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.